Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk Transformation podcasts, where we dig into stories and systems that move organizations from good to better to great. And I'm going to start today with a quote from today's guest. Most organizations don't fail through lack of strategy, but because the strategy never reaches the front line. So hold that thought as I welcome today's guest, Matt Person, CEO of Times Square Advisory and author or soon to be author of The Culture of Alignment. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Matt, you've got over 20 years of experience in strategy, M&A, and executive management, and you've also led global corporate development efforts for multiple private equity-backed companies, as well
That's right.
as middle market investment banking and executive management in professional sports. So, oof, that's quite an eclectic mix.
It
Um,
is. It's connected though. It's three legs of the stool, but they're all actually uniquely connected in many ways.
Yeah, which is brilliant because we were saying before the show that as you move sectors and contexts, one thing became really clear to you about workplace culture and what helped organizations to scale and thrive and what didn't.
That's right.
And which finally led, I think, to your book, which is soon to be published, The Cultural Alignment. So you've built a management philosophy that for me brings together freedom and structure um, and leads to autonomy, but with alignment, which you call the square management system.
That's right.
And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But it gives leaders an architecture to scale their culture, but without suffocating innovation, which for me is looking at one of the major things that companies have to balance, which is how do I scale and also scale my culture. So, can you tell us more about this journey, Matt, and what cultural alignment really is?
Sure. The background, you're right, is part of what framed this opinion.
Hmm.
I started my tenure in executive management in a small business world in the sports industry, and effectively was helping transform and flip underperforming sports franchises. And it was a wonderful experience. It taught me the value of how to create demand. I've been in almost every role in a company, and really saw firsthand companies that did well and
Mm.
companies that didn't, and how to fix those things. And then, kind of got burned out, so to speak, from the sports world and did the flip into investment banking, where I shifted from creating enterprise value to capturing it in a sell-side
Hmm.
process, and really got to see firsthand where value was applied, where investors saw potential, where they saw value, and then missed building things and ended up in the middle in corporate development and
Yeah.
buying companies where I have to affect scale and growth and
Mm.
capture value through acquisitions and then generate that through integration and synergy capture.
Mm.
Um, all of those things are connected in one really meaningful way, which is, the ability to either create or capture value. And you're right. I talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of companies a year,
Mm.
and I've been doing this for almost 25 years now. And so I've seen a lot of good and a lot of bad and a lot of
Yeah.
ugly. Um, and so what started to happen years ago, I was asked an interview question around how I would maintain culture with 600 employees in four different offices in three different states.
Mm. Small
And
question.
small question. And my answer was framed around what I used to deploy as a management practice when I was in the sports industry unknowingly, just kind of
Hmm.
how I chose
Hmm.
to do things. And the recruiter said to me, that is probably the most unique answer I've been given to how you would affect culture or an organizational design. You should do something with that. And it kind of stuck in the back of my head because I was like,
Mm.
that's not a normal answer.
No.
I only finished second for the job. I didn't get it actually. But
But it was a great answer and good
it was a great
feedback.
answer. Yeah. But I stress tested the concept with friends, with colleagues, with executives,
Mm.
and someone said to me, "Well, why don't you just like try to get it published? Like write an article." And I'm like, I don't know how to write. I'm not a good writer. How do I do this?" And so it took time to really flush out, and then eventually it started getting really positive feedback, and I'm humbled that it's garnered a really positive response. And
Mm.
I finally decided to just do it, just put pen to paper and get it out the door. And I'm humbled that I've got publishers who are willing to work with me and push this through. So it's been an exciting process.
Mm. And I love the fact that you use the word humbled, Matt, because it is hard to take something that for us is just natural in the way we do things or has not necessarily been intentionally built, but that's just from experience how we do things. And you've actually written a book about it. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey? Was it hard? Was it scary? Was it liberating? And how do you feel about the fact that you are now an author?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely battled imposter syndrome for a while. Why should anyone care about this concept? I am not a known entity. I joke about it in the preface of the book, actually, that I
I
don't
do.
boast, I don't boast taking up a company. I've never built a unicorn startup. I've never been recognized as a, the Colorado Springs Business Journal recognized me as a 30 under 30 once, for all my
Mhm.
right? But I think the point of the book is that it's not around statistics. It's not one of those books that aggregates interviews from 500 CEOs.
Mm,
It's intentionally built to be a philosophical exercise around how to run a company. And if you believe in the concept, then it's going to work for you. It's okay if you don't believe in it, that's fine.
mm,
But this is at least my view.
mm,
Um, and then the writing part of it was tough, but I got a lot of advice from a lot of people on how to get better at making this more digestible and understandable. It has come a long, long way. I've had
mm,
multiple rounds of reviews, and it's finally now in professional editing, which it needs.
mm,
But it's a concept that was, framed, and writing it too has helped make it better, because then when you actually have to describe it and
mm.
define it, you know if it's real or not. And so it's been a great process. It is exciting to say that this is going to finally reach a shelf.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it must be exciting to think also that your model is not just your model. It's going to be a model that people can refer to, will use. And also, I think it touches on one of the least written about things, which is operationalization of strategies or models or theories into tactics and then operations, which is what you're saying. Strategy often stays at the top on the
Right.
table and doesn't get down to the front line. And that's what I really like about your model is that it actually brings it to the operations, if I may say it like that.
Well, that's a great point, and that was also intentional.
Mm,
One of my biggest frustrations with business books, I actually haven't read a lot of them, but I've read some, and the reason why is because all they do is they want you to copy, and I see that all the time in my current in working environments. I read this book that suggested this, or I feel like we should do that, and
mm,
did you know this company did that? I'm like, that's great, it
yeah.
worked for them. But how many books out there are saying, hey, the five attributes of X, because we interviewed 500 CEOs, and these are the attributes. And that's
Mm,
interesting. Don't get me wrong, it's interesting to know. But it doesn't mean it's actionable for you. It doesn't mean
no,
that it's something that you can deploy. And
no.
the point of this system is that there is an intentionality to constructing your organization, and it should be done your way.
Yeah.
And you can use the book immediately to go figure out how to deploy those elements that construct, in my view, a
Mm,
high performing organization. It's in isolation, simple elements in
mm.
aggregate, uh, create a very well positioned business that allow for growth and scale.
But I also like it because it's not giving us a blueprint as such. It's giving us a framework and an invitation to create our own model of what works for us. And I think that's really important because it talks about alignment, which is already a buzzword. So if we don't really know what that means for us around this table and what we want to do with it, that's going to be difficult. But it also talks about flexibility, which may sound a little bit paradoxical when it's called the square management system. So can we start there, Matt? What
Yeah,
what
let's
does
do it.
square really mean in your system?
Sure. To me, it's not binary.
No.
When you look at culture, what is good culture? Let's start there. What is good culture and what is bad culture? We have
Mm,
commoditized culture as a society. We have taken best places to work attributes and said, hey, this is what we'll copy. I'll do what they did.
yeah.
And my framework on that is no, let's intentionally design the culture that works for you, but at least let's understand what culture is. And
Mm,
and that's the most important part about this. So the culture is a square, and what's inside the square. And the size of the square can change. That's why you said, hey, wait a second, this isn't uniform. It's
yeah.
not. Culture is
Mm,
the individual's perception of good, their ways of doing, their beliefs, their value systems, combine aligning with the ways of doing for the company.
mm,
And the ways of doing that with the company are your systems, your processes, your procedures. If those two things are aligned, and we're not talking binary, but if you're generally in the same alignment, you're going to have a great culture. You're going to think it's an amazing place to work. If
mm,
you are outside that square, right? If you're outside those walls in your ways of doing your beliefs, you're not going to like it.
mm,
And that doesn't make either party wrong. It just means that
mm,
there isn't alignment between those two parties.
mm,
And so there's a bad culture can occur slowly over time, because an employee might start and say this is great, and then a new CEO comes in and starts making changes, and immediately all of a sudden that square, the walls of that square have changed. And you might
Mm,
find yourself outside the square relatively quickly. And all of a
mm,
sudden you say, this isn't for me anymore. And that's why people leave, right?
mm.
And sometimes that's okay. And we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not. So what is the square? The square has four sides. One side is instruction. That
Mm,
is where you start. That is the brand identity of the. Sorry, identity is the first square. That's your vision, your mission. It's your ways of doing. The key question there is like, do our customers, do our staff know what we stand for?
mm,
The
mm.
second part is instruction. That is how you then align the brand and the vision against your onboarding protocols, your knowledge transfer, your training systems. That is the expectation for performance standard across the organization. The third eye of this square is intercommunication. That is how information flows. The key question there is, do our staff, and you mentioned this at the top, do
Mm,
our staff understand
mm,
and do we have a
mm,
free-flowing view of information across the company? That is everything from tone, because that matters in some companies, to the systems you use to communicate, to hierarchy, how often you report, where you report. A lot of people think that this is culture because sometimes intercommunication can be the ping pong table,
yeah.
the happy hour Thursday,
Mm,
stuff like that.
yeah.
But that's just one side of the square. That's one of the eyes. And then you have the last eye, that's information feedback. And
Mm,
that pulls it all together. That's effectively, are you using data and information both on the employee and on the company itself to adapt, to change, to assess, to
mm,
ensure that you're actually following the three other eyes? What those four eyes create is the fifth eye. And the fifth
in
eye
the middle of the square.
in the middle of the
Yeah.
square is constrained independence. And constrained independence is the known degree to which an employee can action their own ideas
I love
because you're going
that.
to bounce around that square. So if you think
Mm,
about it, right, your square can be really tightly constrained where there
mm,
isn't a lot of freedom to decide and you're kind of bouncing against a more rigid infrastructure. And
mm,
sometimes that's okay and necessary. And then you can have a moderate amount, or you can have a very what we call light degree of constraint, which allows for an employee to action and innovate at a much, much higher degree. Some people love that freedom. Other people
mm.
find it claustrophobic. They can't handle the freedom. They want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Neither thing is wrong. And so that's why I say it's a box, it's a square, because that square, those guardrails can be intentionally designed. That's what the system is for. And
Mm,
it allows you to, and they don't have to be uniform, it allows you to create the known degree of constrained independence, and that's your culture. And
mm,
you and your employees need to fit inside this box. Again, it's not binary because there's 400,000 employees. It's not gonna be perfect, but if
mm.
there's a degree to which they align and are inside that box, you're gonna have a high performing culture.
And I love the fact that it's constrained independence because autonomy is really important, independence is really important, but there are constraints to every system, of course. And it allows us to formalize what is happening, what isn't happening, what is being said, what isn't being said. And if I take the four pillars, identity, instruction, intercommunication, and feedback, which is the one, Matt, that is most often ignored, and what happens when it is ignored? Because
It's a
I think
great
there are
question.
trends, aren't they? In all cultures, there are trends across how humans react to this type of thing.
Well, each side has its own, I would call, common points of failure.
Okay.
Um, by the way, the word constrained independence, it can sound caustic, right? Oh, wait, don't constrain my independence. I'm free. Uh,
It gets you
it's
curious.
right, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had an unconstrained environment, right?
Yeah.
What happens in that environment? And this is why this system's so important. If there's and we'll get into what problems are, right? I'm going to answer your question in a
Mm,
second around this. But what happens when there's no constraint?
mm,
Who sets the guardrails?
yeah.
The employees.
Mm,
Is that really what, or you get each division sets their own guardrails because there isn't anyone else, so they'll just define it. And then you get what we call mini squares or fiefdoms. And that's where each department has their own way of doing it. You've got finance reporting in 5 days a week, and sales is only in the office 2 days a week,
mm,
and no one's showing up from marketing, and all of a sudden and people are looking, what's chaos? There's no
yeah.
organization here.
Mm,
So the constraint is important and the box is important because you need to have all sides.
mm,
Most companies go wrong in one area. I don't know if there's a one that is most often ignored, but I
mm,
can walk through really quickly the four sides, the most common error. On
yeah.
identity, really quickly, it is what I call product or service to mission deviation. So when
Hmm.
you have a brand, that brand is communicated. If
Mm,
all of a sudden you start to either acquire a business or you launch a product and people are like, wait a second. I thought you did this. What are you doing over here?
mm,
That can erode a massive amount of trust and faith. Do they know how to make that product? Is it just going to be
mm.
a good product? Are they alienating me because I'm over here? Are they now no longer worried about me? And you start, and your staff and your employees can start to lose faith as well. It's a real problem. It happens a lot. You see a lot of times, especially with restaurants like the Cracker Barrel,
Mm.
right now, where they kind of changed their brand and they didn't realize how strong that constraint was around their brand identity, and it caused a lot of problems. So that
And
that can be a big issue.
just on that though, Matt, I have therefore an assumption that in high growth environments like startup scaling and things like that, it's even more prevalent, or is that my bias?
No, I would say you're not wrong because I mean, all startups tend to pivot at some point, and
Mm,
there's a section of the book I actually write about for entrepreneurial use for startups,
yes.
where the guidance is actually for your brand. The identity side is it actually needs to be somewhat moderate to loose because you do need to pivot. And so if you get
Okay.
into a highly constrained brand that is a startup, you may cause that market confusion. Whereas maybe someone like a hospital,
Yeah.
or a highly regulated environment probably needs a tighter brand because that indicates the attention to the detail, to keep people alive in a hospital scenario kind of thing where you don't want that deviation.
And I think that's really important, Matt, because high tight constraint is not necessarily wrong or bad.
No.
But the way we're formed around these words, when I saw at the outset of the quiz that I did, your quiz to define how constrained we are and where we are, I was thinking, oh, everything should be low constraint. But no, you're saying there is no moral judgment on whether it's high constraint or low constraint. It's just what's adaptable and appropriate for that environment.
That's correct. And
Yeah.
we do, yeah, we exactly. And I understand your point. And I've had a few people say, well,
Uh,
constraint sounds so caustic. And I'm like, well, it does need to come across that way to a degree because there are environments where you need that high level.
mm,
And if you're a manufacturer listening to this, you're probably saying, no, we have to follow the protocols in certain areas to a high degree because if we don't, the product won't come out, it won't be
yes.
manufactured to the degree that we need it to.
No.
So we don't have any variability there. And
Mm,
that's okay.
mm,
Some people also, as employees, there are definitely people who are not there to make decisions. They want to execute and they love
yeah.
executing someone else's and doing that to a high degree. And that's okay too. We have to
Mm,
understand that that's why the system works. People are different. And so
yeah.
they find success in different environments.
Mm, mm. Okay.
On instruction, I think the biggest place where people deviate is that they don't do onboarding correctly,
Mm,
and as a result, the standard of performance is left to the hiring manager, to the division, to the department, and then you get performance variety there, and that
mm,
causes a lot of problems. On intercommunication, I think the biggest deviation there is that there's the publicized view of what the culture is, because again, everyone mistakes intercommunication as culture.
yeah.
And so you get the bait and switch between what the hiring manager said the culture was like and what it actually is when you get there. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, wait a second,
That horrible moment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because no hiring manager has ever said there's a bad culture, right?
No,
Everyone,
of course.
every company's the best.
Mm,
And then the last one on information feedback, companies just don't assess themselves as well as they should. They are great at assessing their employees, but they often tend not to assess themselves,
mm,
and
mm,
you get problems there that maybe they could help them identify.
mm. And as scaling intensifies, how do you, and we are in, well, it was a trend and it's now a necessity as we move into ecosystems and we're more technologically interconnected that we need to decentralize decision making.
Right.
We need a more distributed governance,
Right.
even in large organizations, which is, but as that scale intensifies, how do you keep trust from eroding? Because constrained independence for me works on the fact that everybody trusts that square. Let's go back to the analogy. Everybody
Yeah.
trusts that framework. So which part of the five eyes, I'm going to call them, which part of the four eyes that make up that square should people be focusing on to stop trust from eroding, or is that too binary?
No, it's not binary. In fact, I read a lot about this. It's less so adherence to one specific eye, and it's more so adherence to the full system because
Hmm.
you have to intentionally do it.
Yeah.
You have to use all four sides and all 40
Hmm.
elements, and you have to have one big key piece, the Constitution to adhere to what you said you were going to do.
Yeah.
What someone once told me in negotiating, if you change the box, because everyone has mins and maxes what they want to negotiate,
Mm.
and all of a sudden you're like, well, I'll go lower. Well, that wasn't then your true low, was it? you had your box actually was bigger than you said it was, and
mm,
you just changed. You didn't stick to it. You
mm,
have to stick to what you said you were going to do. And that means that some people are not inside the box, and that's okay.
mm,
And I think that's the hardest part about this whole entire thing because what I see common throughout is the one employee who's completely outside the box, who's
mm.
still on staff that no one wants to fire because they're the high performer. They bring in all the revenue, and everyone's super afraid. I hear this frequently. This one individual contributor, he is or she is so important that if she left, the company would fall down. No, that's impossible. No one person can do that much
It's
damage.
also quite scary.
Yeah. And if that's the case, then you haven't done your job as a
Yeah.
manager in
Yes.
your department.
Yes.
And so we often tend to leave bad actors and kind of allow them, well, let so and so stay. I know they're difficult. And you have to have the constitution. If they're outside the box, they're outside the box, and that's okay.
Mm,
And so I think there's a degree to which there's a key, and I write about it, is like the three rules:
mm,
intentionality, completeness, constitution. And if those things change, then you didn't do it right. Now the system allows for the flexibility.
mm,
It cannot be binary because you have to change with market dynamics and you have to evolve as a company. So it's designed that's why it's a box and it's not a
mm,
line. You're,
mm,
you're kind of bouncing around this, kind of gray area and saying, hey, we're at least within these constraints. But if
mm.
you knowingly deviate to a material degree, then that's where issues pop up.
Mm. And because it's a holistic framework and it deals with the human element, the business element, the governance element, etc., um, how could I use the Square management system as an operating framework and not a culture change tool or a leadership development tool? What would
Yeah,
it, can we dissociate them is my first question, and how different would it look, Matt?
well, that's a great question. So if you're going to use it as an operating system, it's best, well, you can use it two ways as an operating system.
Mm,
And one is a little bit more of a diagnostic. If you're a startup,
mm,
oftentimes I see a lot of growth stage businesses that I work with. They have a great IP, they have a great product. And the people leading that business are the people who built it. So they know the product well. They usually have no idea how to run a company.
yeah.
And that is not an insult to
No,
them.
no.
It's just a different skill set.
Mm,
And so this system, if you're in a startup scenario and you have your, five, four, five, six kind
mm,
of, co-founders or founding members that are in key positions, use it, walk through it with them, go through the 40 elements across all four sides. And they will tell you, because you can read in the book, the high, the
mm,
medium, and the low levels of constraint for that specific element. It'll help you understand how to deploy those systems and processes. You can use it to effectively build the infrastructure for your company
mm,
the way
mm,
you want to. And
mm.
that's the key part, the way you want to,
Yeah.
not the way that you copied someone else did, the way you think is the best way to run your company.
Yeah. In
If
the
you're a
modern.
mature company
Mm,
and you're like, ah, geez, I'm seeing retention problems in staff. We've got churn on contracts. We have a lot of people going to HR with problems. This is a diagnostic tool. Give this survey to the senior, the executive staff, the senior, the middle, and the frontline, and see how they respond. You will
mm,
immediately know when you aggregate the scores where the variances are. And this is where you started the show with the front line
mm,
doesn't always get it. You will immediately tell what the front line thinks versus the senior staff. And you will find those areas because each section, each eye has
mm,
its own score. And within each element, the 10 elements, you can figure out how the high, medium, or low. And so you'll figure out really quickly if there's a deviation of standard. You
mm,
can also use it to say, hey, we're here. We've scored ourselves. This is where we are. But here's where we'd prefer to be. And then you can isolate that delta and say, these elements need to change.
mm.
So it
And
becomes a really useful diagnostic.
yeah, and what would it look like because when I look at what's happening globally, the fact that, we're within organizations, we're having to create team structures, to cope with the interconnectedness, but also the ecosystem element, because outside it's now network of networks and, the whole market face changes quite quickly. So what would it look like during either an integration, an M&A integration,
Yeah.
or during a huge, I see a lot of this, but of course that's where I work the most, major reorganizations within organizations, organizational change.
Well, the M&A use case is strong. In fact,
Mm,
that's actually where I started stress testing a lot of this was
mm,
having been on buy side and sell side. Culture
mm.
is known in M&A as one of the main reasons
Yeah,
that the
yeah,
synergies weren't captured. I
yeah.
don't know if it's an easy cop out or not, but But what I would tell you is that if you don't know your systems and processes as the home company, the acquiring company, and you bring in someone that's completely different, like you can't expect it to work. And the
Mm,
high level example would be if I like going to the office every day and I like wearing a suit and I want to sit in a siloed office with a closed door. If you acquire a remote only business and force all those people who are sitting at home to work, you
mm,
can't expect that to work. And that's a really
mm,
high level example, but I have been in sell side scenarios as a banker where an acquirer used that one example to not buy a company. And at the time, I thought it was erroneous. Why you can fix
mm,
that. That shouldn't be
mm,
a reason you don't do the deal. Now, having thought through this further, having matured through my career, that is probably the best example of someone adhering to their constitution I've
mm.
ever seen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to buy this company because it'll fail because they're remote and we're in office in suits. It'll never work. And that was kind of an aha moment for me where I was like, this system works
Mm,
because that's actually what you should be doing. You should be deciding not to buy that company on that basis. Um,
okay.
and so from an M&A perspective, you should score the target and you score yourself and you can use it as a diagnostic to
Mm,
figure out what you might have to change in diligence. And if it's a bridge too far across the elements, then you can make a decision. Maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe
yeah.
maybe all of these problems are just too much for us to assume and you walk away. Uh,
Mm.
people
Save yourself a lot
over-rationalize
of
deals.
money.
You would. Well, people over-rationalize deals all the time. Oh,
Mm,
we'll fix the culture. We'll change that. Don't worry about it. The product is great. We'll sell it. And the people are the ones who have to make those synergies work. And if they're not going to get along,
mm,
it's not going to work no matter what you do.
mm. And what about major reorgs? So I'm looking at like large organizations with between 100 and 350,000 people, where they reorganize whole departments, they reorganize satellite structures for innovation, and they're looking at, assessing the impact of that reorganization and how they plug it back into the existing.
So the system would tell you the parameters to which the reorg has to adhere to.
Okay.
So you would use it to decide the preferred operating
Mm-hmm.
systems, and then you would adjust the organization accordingly,
Mm,
based on where it is now. So it
mm,
goes back to that diagnostic where if you are doing the reorg, what are you reorging? What are you changing? There's 40 elements there.
mm,
Not all of them are what I would call reorg specific, but
mm,
where you get into a lot of the reorg stuff is like instruction and brand and vision in nature of intercommunication, and you start making changes. Hey, we used to report bi-weekly, you're now going to report weekly.
okay.
Because that's the standard for this company. We're now going to use Slack, whereas before we used emails.
Mm,
That's a change in how you communicate. The company is now going to institute, multiple, happy hours on Thursdays to foster casual environment, which they never did before. That's a
mm,
material change. Some people love that. Some people abhor
mm,
abhor forced
mm.
communication. Um, so all those things you have to, if you're going to make a reorganization, if you're going to affect change, you have to know the standard to which you're changing from, and where you're headed, and the system would help you identify the areas that are changing.
Yeah, and of course you can make an ambition, can't you? A scored ambition of the constrained independence you're looking for.
Yes,
As an ambition. That's what I really like about it is that it gives them data for a transformation roadmap in terms
yes,
of an ambition that's based around the whole system, even if it is a diagnostic.
right.
But what are the most common signs that you see, Matt, for you of an organization that's misaligned? If
Employee churn
yeah,
easily.
okay,
It's
okay,
employee churn. People start leaving.
mm,
It's because the square changed. There's two funny things around this that I don't have a lot of statistics
hmm
because I want it to be a philosophical exercise that you understand the why and then you can
mm.
implement the how. I've never been a fan of if you use this system, you'll increase
Yeah,
operating
yes,
24%.
yeah,
All right. So, but there's one statistic that I found that mattered, and it was that in the first 18 months, a new hire has a 50% chance of success. They might leave on their own accord and then they get fired because it didn't fit. That's astounding, especially because
mm,
new hires, one of my favorite quotes that I've come up with through this process is new hires don't start their first day disgruntled.
no,
They don't.
mm,
But they get that way somehow. How does that happen? How did two employees go work at the same company and one works and one doesn't?
mm,
That's interesting to me. Why did that happen?
mm,
Especially when the hiring managers all think that they have a culture that's wonderful. You should fit, right? We have this we culture. Everyone should fit. It's very broad, and we've common sized the attributes. And if you don't work out, that's a scarlet letter that the employee then wears. well, Susie, it doesn't
Mm,
look like it's going to work here. You don't fit our culture. And the company comes down on you as if you're the bad actor.
mm,
My argument really is that that's not the case. There is no bad employee, and I'm going to forgive fraud and malfeasance and all that. But there are no bad employees and there's no bad cultures. Some people
mm,
love the alpha Wall Street finance, tough,
mm,
competitive in world. Some people abhor it. Some people want that free, innovative environment to make their own decisions. Some people just want to be told what to do.
mm,
You as an individual, it's a symbiotic relationship. You as an individual have to know where you're set up for success,
mm,
and then go find that, and not chameleon yourself into someone else's way of doing.
mm.
You get those two things right, you're going to have a better culture.
Which brings me to the age-old sort of discussion in organizations in the last 10 years around explore and exploit. Okay, so we need business as usual. So we need to carry on doing business as usual. We also need to do innovation.
Yeah.
So how does that translate, if you like, Matt, into the square? What would you be
Well,
expecting to see happen in that square to have to allow both business as usual but also innovation?
that's technically what the square fosters. And
Okay.
it, now some companies, I think the Google is the infamous example of allowing 1 day per week
Mm,
for people to,
innovation. Mm,
yeah, it's for innovation.
mm.
And that was again a known and
Mm.
communicated and intentionally designed construct.
Okay, nice.
Um,
Mm.
Other companies, just maybe they don't necessarily state it as much,
Hmm.
but they use the system to kind of create that. Here's how I would look at it.
Mm.
The square, when you have the known guardrails and the known constraints, what happens, why it works, is and how it creates innovation. One, if you know what the borders are, then you know the decisions that you can make yourself inside that box. So I don't have to go, Susie, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this?
Mm.
You can just you can act on your own accord. When you act on your own accord, you're affecting output. You are
Mm.
empowered then to make these micro decisions.
Mm.
You can be creative inside that box to a known degree and not face any backlash or
Mm.
fear of like, well, wait a second, what are you doing here, guy? Why did that happen? No, you kind of know already. And if you give people the right constraints and the right known and communicated degree of freedom, they're going to innovate to that degree, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And when you are able to innovate or bring something forward without fear of backlash, say, hey, what about this, boss? You're then enabling someone to be empowered and they feel like they're connected to the outcome, even if it's a small part. So when that happens, then they become more trusting of themselves, their boss,
Mm.
their employees, because they know that everyone else is inside the square. Trust, innovation, empowerment, creativity, speed from not having to ask all these questions around what they can and can't do creates a loyal and loyal workforce. And that's what the square is designed to do. It's designed
Mm.
to give you that all of those benefits inside those known constraints. So
Mm.
innovation is fostered there by virtue of the micro decisions and the creativity that the guardrails provide. And the degree
Nice.
to which you
Mm.
want the innovation depends on how big the box is.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Because it allows for known knowns, it allows for known unknowns, it also allows for unknown unknowns, doesn't it? And that's the independence part of constrained independence.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can do this on my own. And so you're going to foster creativity within the guardrails that you have. And
Mm.
one of the things I talk about most, how do people, first off, every single company has guardrails. Every company has constrained independence. It's just not known and communicated. What happens? You're the new employee, you kind of fall back on what you know, and then someone slaps you on the wrist and goes, no, that's not how we do it here. And you're like, oh, okay. And
Mm.
so you pivot. And so you end up framing your box based on this kind of osmosis and peer consentiment, as
Mm.
opposed to maybe benefiting from the advanced
Yeah.
creation of the box through the square system, which you'd get in instruction and stuff like that.
Mm. And I like the fact that it also provides a senior leadership tool through which they can formalize and give permission for both business as usual and innovation.
That's
Because
right.
I often hear that, oh, when you finish playing around in the innovation lab, come and do some real work, that type of thing. Although, so the permission given within a culture is really important. And that's what I like about the square as well. It frames that in a tangible fashion for people to feel safe enough to actually formalize it.
Right. Yep, it's true. And I think sometimes what happens, one of the things I talk about with some other colleagues that I work with
Yeah.
is, um, you'll hear this phrase a lot. I wish Susie had just, we gave her all this freedom to,
Mm,
she never jumped and took advantage of it.
mm,
She just sat there. Why wouldn't she just, I would expect that you would fill the void.
mm,
And I actually said this the other day in a meeting. I said, no, I was like, that is not actually a bad employee.
mm,
It's actually your fault as a manager. And they were shocked by that statement. And I said, no,
mm,
what actually is happening is that Susie is not moving
mm,
because she doesn't know if that she's allowed to.
mm.
Now, it's a different if you said, hey, you can go do this and they didn't do it. That's another story.
Yeah.
But if you're expecting an employee to just on their own accord go action something off the cuff,
Mm, mm,
that's an irrational management response.
mm,
And because that person may not have known that the box had just changed, that they were
mm,
now increased in their ability, that person thinks, I'm actually being a good employee. I'm
mm,
not overstepping. Because the
mm.
inverse of that is the employee that is so aggressive and so over the bounds that if they see or they think there is a void, they just go do something. And that
Yeah.
can cause all kinds of problems when they're not supposed to do that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what you're actually fostering is the employee who's not supposed to do something, and you're saying, and you're actually calling that good.
Yeah.
So we have to step back and think differently around how we actually, what we understand of employee actions, because it may not have been the employee who was at fault, it may have been the boss.
Mm. And just on that thought, and this is one of my final questions because time is running, but what have you learned about leadership, Matt, from building and applying this system across so many industries and sectors?
What I've found that's interesting around leadership is that I don't think that there is a definition of what good leadership looks like. I think it is entirely dependent upon the association of those employees to that person.
Mm.
And that's the key with providing direction and advice and counsel and growth is framing it in a way that your employees understand so that you're aligned.
Mm.
And that's what good leadership is fostering an environment where people are aligned.
Mm.
And if they know that they can succeed, and if they are misaligned, then people don't, that's where the disharmony comes from. So for me, companies that succeed, what I've seen through all the years, aligned companies, aligned teams, aligned businesses, well-structured, well-organized businesses are the ones that fly and scale and do amazingly well. And the ones that don't have that are the ones that fall apart. And it really
Mm.
doesn't have anything to do with the person at the top. It has everything to do with how well they've organized the business.
Mm. And how well they've created the conditions for that to be able to thrive within their organization, I'm hearing. So
That's right.
what would your final call to action be, Matt, for leaders listening around starting to think about what this square management system means for them?
Well, go to townsquare-advisors.com.
Hmm.
That's the website that you can find the free quiz that you took,
Yeah.
and also the full 40-point elements. If you want to learn a little bit more about yourself, the environment that you do well in, again, it's a symbiotic relationship. The employees have to know where they succeed as much as companies need to institute the policies for success. So
Totally.
there's two free quizzes that you can take to learn a little bit more about high, medium, and low levels of constraint and what that looks like. And if you want to dig in and take the full 40-point survey and really dig in and figure it all out, you can do that too. You can also sign up for an advanced copy of the book, The Culture of Alignment, that really details in full concept both the philosophical underpinnings of the square management systems, what we've gotten wrong in culture today, how the system gets it right.
Mm.
You can go sign up for that as well. So that's a couple things for people to kind of dig in on and learn about.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. And I was going to ask you where people can find out more about you, the Square Management System, and your book, but you've just answered that question. So I will put the links in the show notes so that people can find that. And I think, as I step out of this, my takeaway is the Square Management System is more than a framework. It's a mindset shift. It's going back to your teams and asking, where do we leave too much ambiguity? Where do we stifle ownership with invisible constraints? And where do we need to keep constraints? And what will that look like in 6 months' time is my takeaway, Matt. If you had to give one takeaway from all your research and experience to date, what would it be?
I think first off, I think you're correct that's the goal here. It's also this is meant to be actionable. My
Hmm.
takeaway here is culture is intentional,
Hmm.
organizational design is intentional, and it can be actioned immediately. This is not a book or a framework that's just going to sit on your desk. Oh, that's interesting. Rip it up.
Mm.
Dig in. How is the key piece that differentiates this from every other business book you've read that just kind of aggregates and disseminates information from somebody else. This is about helping you do it your way and actioning it your way. And that I think is one of the more powerful things around it that I've intended to do is is to give someone a framework that they can read, digest, understand. It is simple. The parts in isolation are simple, as you found taking the 40-point example. You're like,
Mm.
but in aggregate, they create a system that fosters the culture that you want. And some of those things, like just whether or not you wear a shirt that has a logo on it or have access to a company store with merchandise,
Mm.
does factor into how people think about and associate and become loyal to their own company. All those attributes that come together intentionally. So that's the goal there.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with that call to action to actually dig in and make it their own. Matt, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories, your experience, and your insight. It's been a great conversation. Thank you very much.
It has. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.